Hello again and welcome to another GCSE Sociology revision video from me, Ben, at All Sociology. Today's video is going to be a little bit different to the way that I normally do these. So today what I'm going to do is respond to one of the biggest requests that I get from students and my audience, and that's to do a run through or walkthrough of GCSE Eduqas Sociology Paper 1. So I'm now going to share my screen with you, and what you should now be able to see is me up in the top right corner, and you should now be able to see an exam paper on the screen. So we've got here, this is the exam paper, component one, so paper one from last year, from 2022, as we can see there. Now, when you get into your exam, you'll have to fill in your details at the top there, so your first name and your second name, your centre number, your school will tell you what that is, and your college, and then also your candidate number. Again, that will be completely specific to you. Just a bit of an overview of what's on the front of the paper. It tells you how much time you get, an hour and 45 minutes, right? So that's basically 105 minutes if you add it all together. You also get here, it tells you what kind of questions you get. So you get 6 main questions. There are like A, B, C parts to them as well. So it's not just like 6 flat questions. And then within those questions, it tells you how many marks you get for each of them. So you can see the key ones really are sections 4 and 5, where you get 29 marks and 30 marks respectively. So that's well over half of your paper. It's just going to be done on questions 4 and 5. So that's just a bit of an overview as to what you might see on that paper. Let's go down and start to get into how we would do this. Now, I'm not going to go through every single answer to every question because I'd be here for ages, but I am going to give you the basics of what you might need to say. Now, the first question is a nice, easy one to get you started. Hopefully, this won't cause many of you too many problems. You've got to just take the appropriate term from the box to complete the sentences below. You get 4 sentences, you get a bunch of words. There's more words than there is spaces. You just need to put the right ones in. So the first one is something that refers to whether research is morally right or wrong. That would be your ethics. B, someone did research on the lads and anti-school subcultures. That would be Willis. Something refers to a family system where male and female roles are similar. That would be symmetrical. And then the final one refers to differences in ways of life between societies. Presumably that's going to be your cultural diversity. So hopefully a nice, easy 4 marks to get you started then. Next question is one where you have to read a passage and then answer the questions that follow. So the passage reads, children are taught norms and values from a young age. In the family, they will learn how to talk, walk, how to eat acceptably, and the importance of good health and education. They will continue to learn norms and values throughout life. The first question you've got is a 2-marker. Describe what is meant by norms. So a 2-marker, you need to give the answer and then develop it. Look at how much space you get to write. There's like 5 or 6 lines there. If you're writing less than half of that, you probably haven't written enough. So you need to give the basic definition of norms. So norms are the social expectations of behavior in society. You then need to develop that by giving an example or saying something else, giving some more information. So you might say norms are the socially expected behaviors in society. They are taught to us by agents of socialization, or we learn norms through culture, or any examples of norms. So for instance, it's a norm to speak quietly in libraries would be absolutely fine. Okay, so then letter B, identify one norm in the passage above. We have to look at this passage. We have to use the exact words that are mentioned in this passage. Now, there are 3 things in there that would be considered norms. The only 3 things they will take would be how to walk, how to talk, and how to eat acceptably, or how to eat as well. So just make sure you use the language of the question or of the passage for those particular types of questions. They're only worth 1 mark, but no need to get that one wrong. Right. Explain one way that peer groups may pass on norms to their members. Now, this could be a potentially tricky question for you. You have to think here about what your friends might do to pass on particular norms. Now, there's a bunch of potential answers you could have here. You could have anything along the lines of your peers being role models and you imitating their behavior. You might talk about the way in which peer groups might use informal sanctions to kind of reward or punish certain behavior. The classic one you're probably going to look at here is potentially through peer pressure, for instance, encouraging people to smoke or something like that. But again, make sure you give that example as well, because you get 2 marks for this one, and you've got, as I say, 6 lines or so to make your answer up. So do make sure that you're writing in sufficient detail to get your 2 marks. Right, okay. We're now on to one that I think could potentially be a bit of a tricky question. Now, I went through beforehand and I had a bit of a think about how you could answer these. So I've made a couple of notes of this. Now, the question is identify and explain with examples. So you must give examples, 2 ways in which children might be socialized into an ethnic identity in their families. So this is a tricky one. What you want to be thinking of here, I suppose, is about the way in which culture, and that's what we're thinking about here. Ethnicity is about someone's cultural background. So thinking about that, what does that mean? It can include anything like language or religion, nationality. It could even include things like dress, music, foods that are eaten, and so on and so forth. So you've got to think about how they're socialized. So you might talk about parents maybe teaching a religion and encouraging their children to follow a religion. You might think about parents acting as role models and teaching the language that they speak as well. You might then take that a little bit further by, for instance, we're talking about religion, taking children to religious services or encouraging them to pray or teaching them the sort of the norms and the stories of their religion. And when it comes to things like language, it might be the case of speaking language, speaking a particular language at home or following traditions, anything like that. But it can be a bit of a tricky one, this one. So just think about what ethnicity means or ethnic identity means. It really refers to culture, then split culture up into those bits, things like, as I say, language, religion, sanctions, schools, we talk about food, dress, music, those kind of things. So that's your first section over, 9 marks out of the way. Sorry, the second section, should I say, because the first question is just literally that one, fill in the gaps. So question 3, again, we've got to read a passage and answer the questions that follow. This one says, agents of socialization, such as the family, peer groups and schools, have an important role in teaching children the culture of their society. These agents of socialization are also agents of social control. Explain what is meant by agents of socialization. So the key thing here, again, it's a 2-marker. So you have to say what an agent of socialization is, and then you need to extend it, for instance, by giving more information, or an example is probably the easiest way here. So an agent of socialization is just somebody that socializes to something or somebody that teaches us the culture of our society. They teach us the norms and values. Give an example of that. For instance, the family might be an agent of socialization by teaching us primary socialization, also teaching us the norms and values of society, or any other example there. You could also talk here about, for instance, any other agent of socialization, whether that's the media, peer groups, education, etc., etc. Okay, let's now have a look at another question. So explain 2 ways that societies maintain social control. Now, you need to know what social control is. If you don't, go back and watch a video I've just done. I think it's episode number 18. It's the first one in the crime series. It goes all over social control. Now, the basic way to answer this question is you need to know that there are 2 types of social control. There is, on the one hand, formal social control, and on the other hand, there's informal social control. So that's the way I would go into this. The 2 ways are formal and informal. For each of those, I would give an example of a formal agent of social control. So with formal, it would be the police. With informal, it might be your family, education, religion, something like that. And then I'd give an example about how they maintain social control. So for instance, the police might use formal sanctions like arrest, whereas your family might use informal sanctions like grounding you or putting you on the naughty step or anything like that. Okay, so just make sure you can show that distinction between formal and informal social control, and of course the types of sanctions that might be used as well. So on to the next question. This one is 3C. Explain 2 reasons why societies need social control. Now, this is I think this can be a bit of a tricky one. And the reason is the 2 reasons I'm going to give are quite close to one another. So the first reason I would give for this is that we must have social control to keep order in society. We want order so that everyone kind of behaves themselves, keeps to the rules, keeps to the norms and values of society. When we've got order, society will work well. So without that, we have got a problem. Then my second reason would be something around what happens if we don't have social control, we have disorder or we have chaos. This is where society starts to fall apart, because all of the institutions that we've got, if people aren't doing what they're supposed to, then they're going to stop working. Society is going to stop working as well. So you want to be talking here about the way in which really we need expected ways of behavior. We need people to enforce that if they can't behave themselves. If we don't do that, people are just going to do what they want. They're going to break the law. And we're going to have chaos and anarchy in society. So a bit of a tricky one there, but only a 4-marker. So don't worry too much if you're struggling. You should be able to get 1 reason. But as I said, 2 reasons I would give is 1, we need order in society for society to work. And then I've got like the opposite of that, which is without social control, we have chaos, which can cause the downfall of society. So 2 reasons for you there. That's the end of section 3. And that means actually that you're through the basic sort of what I call key concepts start of sociology, the stuff that I normally teach at the start of year 10. So you're out of that stuff. And if I'm being honest with you, I genuinely mean this. Certainly as an examiner, those questions are much harder to mark than these questions, which we're now going to see on the family. And then we've got a section on education and a section on methods. So the reason they're harder to mark is basically because they are quite easy for students to get the wrong end of the stick with. Whereas these ones here, these are like you're either going to know it or you don't. So question 4, A, B, and C, and D are all on the family. You get a 2-mark question, a 4-mark question, an 8-mark question, and then a 15-mark question. That will result in, I think that's 29 marks worth of questions. Let's go through and see what we've got to say here. So number 1, or 4A, should I say, describe what's meant by nuclear family. You need to give the basic definition of the nuclear family. That is a family of 2 parents and 2 or more biological children. You might want to mention, for instance, that it's a 2-generation family. So you've just got mum and dad and then kids, for instance. Then you're probably going to need to say something a little bit extra on top of that. So you might say the nuclear family is not the only type of family in society, or the nuclear family is often seen as being the ideal type of family, or the model family we should aim for. Okay. So again, thinking about just extending that answer beyond, we all know what a nuclear family is. That'll get you 1 mark. You need to extend it. You need to develop it. Throw an example in. Give a little bit more information. Okay. Question B, 4B, explain why it's argued that families are patriarchal. This is a 4-mark question. Now, 4 markers, I'd always suggest to throw in 2 reasons if you can. So the why families argue to be patriarchal? Well, this is the feminist argument, of course. You need to give a couple of sort of clear examples if you can. So the examples I might give would be something like, for instance, women are doing more domestic work and sort of family work than men. We can look even at the examples of Anne Oakley and a dual burden for that. You could also talk potentially about the ways in which men have more power in families over things like money or decision making as well. So again, if you wanted to talk about those things, just give an example with each one, and that will give you enough to get you 4 out of 4 for that question. Okay, right, now we're on to sort of like quite a big one. These are the questions. So question 4C, 4D, which is a 4-mark, sorry, an 8-mark and a 15-marker, and then 5C and 5D, which would be an 8-mark and a 15-marker. This is where ultimately you really have got to perform, because these are your big questions. These are worth a lot more marks than those ones we've gone through previously. So this question here asks you, explain why more couples are choosing to cohabit in the contemporary UK. You should explore 2 reasons in your response. So you have to talk about 2 things. The way I structure these is I would just give 2 sort of PL paragraphs, so point, explain, evidence, link. You don't need an intro, you don't need a conclusion for this. It's just a bit of waste of time. So how would I talk about this? 2 reasons for more cohabitation. I'd probably go down the route of, number 1, the changing position of women. So women are now going out to work. They don't therefore need to rely on men to marry them for financial security, like perhaps they used to 60, 70 years ago. Women are now putting their careers before their relationships and married life and so on and so forth. This has also been helped by policy changes and legal changes. So for instance, like the Equal Pay Act, which enabled, or supposedly enabled, women to be paid the same as men. That would be my first reason. So basically the idea that women don't need to marry for money now because they have their own independence and they don't need to do that. My second reason would probably focus on changing attitudes towards relationships and families and stuff like that. So it's far more acceptable now to cohabit, which, if you don't know what cohabit means, it means living together without being married. And then I'd maybe tie the changing social attitudes thing into secularization, talking about how people no longer feel the need to be married now to start a family. Certainly there's not as much stigma as there used to be about like living together without being married, or having kids without being married, without wedlock, those kind of things. Ultimately, we're going to be talking about the way that the stigma of living together without being married has declined massively. And also, I might mention in here that cohabiting families are the biggest or fastest growing type of living situations in the UK. So that's basically how I'd go for that. 1 paragraph on the changing role of women in society. Women don't need to marry for money. And the second paragraph on changing social attitudes and secularization, the ways in which basically we now don't feel as stigmatized we don't feel any stigma as much as we used to about not being married. That's how I'd go through that one. So 2 paragraphs, no intro, no conclusion, don't need it, it's a waste of time. But when you do need an intro conclusion is on these 15-mark essays. So these are the biggies. They are the big ones. They are the best. Changes in norms and values are the main reason for changes in the divorce rate. do you agree with this view? So with a 15 marker like this, most of the time you'll be given a statement, and the statement here is changes in norms and values, the main reasons for changes in divorce rate. Do you agree with this view? I always say to my students, in the nicest possible way, no one cares whether you agree with that view or not. What they want to know is, what do different sociological arguments say? This question is basically asking you, is changes in norms and values or changes in attitudes the only reason for the decline in divorce rate? The answer is no, but that is one particular role. So the structure for this essay needs to be a very short introduction. And in your introduction, you're going to mention that yes, changes in norms and values have had an effect, but it's not the only thing. And for this one, you want to be thinking about some other reasons. Now, I'm going to actually recycle the reasons that I used for the 8-mark question. I used the 2 reasons I used for the changing role of women and changes in attitudes and secularization. Now, changes in attitudes is the one mentioned in the question, so I've got to talk about that. I'm also going to just basically regurgitate the same stuff that I mentioned for changing role of women, except in applying it to divorces rather than living together without being married. And the final thing you could also talk about here, you could actually talk just solely about policy changes as well. So my 3 paragraphs, and this has got to be a free, doesn't have to be, but if you want to get 15 out of 15, it's going to need to be a small intro. It's going to need to be 3 paragraphs. One of those paragraphs needs to refer to the thing in the question, so changes in norms and values. And then my other 2 paragraphs, one is going to be on the changing position of women, and my other paragraph is going to be on changes in policies and laws as being the cause of the divorce reform the cause of the rise in divorce rate. So in this essay, essentially what I'm going to be talking about is, yes, changes in laws and changes. Okay, sorry, it's before 10 o'clock in the morning and I clearly can't speak today, but we're going to carry on regardless. Changes in norms and values have had a big impact. It's now seen as less stigmatized to get divorced. I would definitely bring in the argument of secularization into this talk about changes in norms and values. So declining importance of religion, therefore divorce isn't seen as a sin anymore. Much more people get divorced because it's not as stigmatized, or they don't feel that they're going to be judged as such religiously or by others in society through that stigma. That would be my first paragraph. Now you need to criticize it. So how do you criticize that? Well, you might argue that actually the amount of people who are religious in the UK is going down, 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 down. At recent count on the 2020, you don't need to know this, but on the 2021 census, I think it's 47% of the UK are Christian. So that's half of the UK. So we're talking about less than half of the people in the UK are Christian. My second argument would be definitely about the changes in policies and laws and stuff like that. So your classic policy for this is going to be the 1969 Divorce Reform Act. You're going to need to talk about the fact that this change was brought in, the law was brought in. As a result, it made divorce easier. Why? Because you didn't need to prove fault with divorce like you used to previously. You needed to be able to prove that someone had committed adultery or deserted you. This just allowed people to use the reason of irretrievable breakdown. That just means you've fallen out of love with one another. Talk about that a little bit more. You then want to be able to criticize it again. So my criticism to this would be something like saying, well, actually, at the moment, the divorce rate in the UK is the lowest it's been for 50 years. So perhaps it hasn't actually had a huge impact, or at least that impact has kind of leveled off over time. My final explanation for this one would be the changing position of women. By this, what I'm going to talk about is the fact that women now go out to work, they earn their own money, they have more independence, more freedom. Therefore, if they're in an unhappy marriage, they don't need to stay in that unhappy marriage. Whereas previously, we'll go back to 70 years, 1950s, only 1 in 5 married women worked. Married women did not have their financial independence, which meant if they were unhappy, they basically had to stay in an unhappy marriage, or what we might call an empty shell marriage. But because of the fact that women were getting their own money, their own independence, they did not need to rely on staying in that marriage for financial independence. That meant they could leave. You then need to criticize it by saying that not everyone leaves marriages just because they're unhappy. Lots of people work at their marriages, etc. Then you need a short conclusion. And your short conclusion will just be regurgitating what you've said. In conclusion, whilst changes in norms and values have had an impact on the divorce rate, we've also got to consider the impact of policies like the Divorce Reform Act and also the changing role of women. There you go, bish, bash, bosh. And if you must criticize your paragraphs. If you don't, you are missing out on massively important analysis and evaluation marks. And analysis and evaluation are worth 8 out of these 15 marks. So over 50% of your marks will be based on how well you've explained things and how well you've criticized the ideas you've raised. Okay, so that's a 15 marker. Bish, bash, bosh, all the way through that. We're well over halfway through this now. So we're now going to look at the education section. Education section is very similar to the family. The only difference is rather than in the family, you get a 2 mark, a 4 mark, an 8 mark, and a 15 mark. This one, you get a 2 mark, a 5 mark, an 8 mark, and a 15 mark. So I'm just going to go through the 2 marker, describe, went a bit Scottish then, describe one way in which peer pressure may affect achievement in education. Right. So clearly with this, you want to be thinking about, well, peer pressure can be positive, it can be negative. If it's positive, you might be part of a pro-school subculture where your friends are encouraging you to do better all of the time, increasing your achievement. Or the other way around, you want to be thinking about peer pressure might be linked to joining an anti-school subculture, in which case those people are going to put peer pressure on you to not do well and those kinds of things. So link it to anti-school and pro-school subcultures with that one. Number 5B, outline why it's argued the hidden curriculum is important. Again, this is another tricky one, I think, here. It's tricky because you need to know what the hidden curriculum is. You need to know why it's seen as important. And ultimately, I would say the ease or the best way to sort of approach this question would be by going down a theory route. So let's just go over what a hidden curriculum is. First of all, hidden curriculum is anything you learn in school that isn't in lessons. So it's life skills, like the things like the importance of punctuality, the importance of obeying authority, the importance of wearing a uniform, the fact that we get used to things like competition at schools, the system of rewards and sanctions at schools. So that's what the hidden curriculum is, right? Why is it important? I'm going to go down the Marxist route for this because Marxists make a really clear argument that there's a link between what happens in schools and what happens in the workplace. And their argument is basically that the hidden curriculum teaches us and prepares us for life in the workplace in the capitalist system. So I'm going to go down that route, and I'm going to say this is very important for Marxists because they say schools are the ways that we're socialized into being an obedient worker. You don't need to, but I'm going to bring in a theorist here because I know that Bowles and Gintis talked about the correspondence theory. Correspondence theory is just basically where school mirrors the needs of the workplace. That's basically what this question's asking. I'm going to throw in some examples, perhaps like by talking about schools getting us used to sanctions, so we understand that at work, if we disobey the rules, we're going to have a consequence. I might mention things like punctuality, the importance of turning up on time. For instance, at school, if you're late for a lesson, you might get a sanction, a detention. The same thing's going to happen at work. So the schools teach us to get used to the life in working through those hidden curriculum things. Give a few examples, as I say, things like punctuality, uniform, the importance of competition, whatever else, and you won't be too far wrong on that one. Oh, sorry, by the way, I should have mentioned with this one, a 5 marker, how does it differ from a 4 marker? There isn't really much difference. I would just write my answer for this in one straight paragraph. Try and include a couple of things as well, like you would with a 4 marker. And my couple of things here are going to be my examples that I'm going to use from the hidden curriculum. Okay, so we're coming very close towards the end of this now. I'll say that, I'm going to still be banging on for another 10 minutes at least. Question 5C, explain using examples how anti-school subcultures may affect achievement in education. You kind of had a very similar question to this already with peer pressure. You can think about the ways in which anti-school subcultures can obviously lead people to certain types of behavior that might go against the values and norms of the school. That might be a key way into this. So if you want a theorist that's associated with that, that's Paul Willis in his Learning to Labour study. So what Paul Willis argues is basically working class kids get into anti-school subcultures because they don't see the value in the school and the school values and norms and things like that. What they then do is they make up their own kind of rules, norms, and values, and they subscribe to those which often are at odds with the school. So if the school value is something like work hard, your anti-school subculture value will be don't work hard. If the school value is wear your uniform, your anti-school subculture value would be don't wear your uniform, that kind of thing, right? So I'm going to talk about that, how it can lead to bad behavior, mucking around in lessons, and ultimately that's going to lead to not listening, not paying attention, and leads to a lack of achievement. The other thing you can do here is potentially link it into another couple of studies. So you might go down anti-school subcultures being labelled as troublemakers. Therefore, the teaching is different, and therefore the way the students react to that label is very different. So you might go down the route of like your Hargreaves or your Becker talking about labeling, self-fulfilling prophecies, all of those kind of things. So teacher tells you you're stupid or you're rubbish or you're no good. Are you going to then believe that? The other way you can do this is sort of by thinking about, okay, how can being an anti-school subculture lead you to be put in different sets or streams at school? So this again would be, so a set or a stream is like a group in school based on your achievement. A set is just a group based on one subject. So commonly maths, you have like top set, middle set, bottom set, or whatever. Streaming or banding, it means the same thing, is where you're in ability groups for every single subject as well. So your behavior in a anti-school subculture may well lead you to be put into a set or a stream, presumably a lower one because it's anti-school. Who's your theorist you tie into this? It's Stephen Ball. Okay, so 2 paragraphs for that. No intro, no conclusion. I'd whack one in there on the work of Willis and anti-school subcultures rejecting school values, and then I'd put another one in there, potentially either on the effects of being an anti-school subculture leading to labelling. That's your Becker, your Hargreaves, or it could be anti-school subcultures leading into being set or banded or streamed, and that is your Stephen Ball. So on to the big essay. Now, with this essay, this one, I actually think this is a beaut of a question. And I'm going to explain why I think this is a nice question in a minute. It might not look like a nice question. Cultural factors are the main reason why some working class children underachieve in education. Do you agree with this view? Well, once again, it does not matter whether you agree with that. You're not going to get any points for you going, I think that's correct, or I don't agree with that. What the examiners want to hear is, what do sociologists say? Are there other reasons for why working class kids underachieve at school? Yes, there are. Now, if you are not familiar with this stuff, go back and watch my video on education and achievement, because it will go over all of this stuff for you. Basically, when you get asked this type of question, there are, like, if you know your business, if you know your onions with this is a lovely question, because when we think about why kids underachieve at school, there are kind of 3 main, well, there's mainly 2, no, let me make it simple. There's 3 main types of factors, right? You've got the stuff that goes on in school, which could be anything like labeling, teacher treatment. It could be anti-school subcultures, anything that happens in school that might affect your achievement, right? Now, the thing that is mentioned in the question is cultural factors. That's not really about school. That's about what happens at home, okay? Now, what happens at home could be split into cultural factors on the one hand and then material factors on the other. Cultural factors are things that you can't really touch. They're more like values, experiences, the ways you experience your life. Material factors are things you can touch and you can buy with money. So that's the basic structure for this essay. What you need: an introduction. You're going to need 3 paragraphs. Your first paragraph is going to be on cultural factors, as is mentioned in the question. I'm going to lead that into things like, for instance, the amount of encouragement or opportunities you might get given at home, for instance. So let's say your parents didn't have a very good experience at school. The likelihood is they are not going to want to, they're not going to be super encouraging of you at school. As a result, that might lead you to underachieve. We know that working class kids underachieve more than middle class kids. So you've always got to tie this back to class factors. Perhaps it's the case that if we use Bourdieu's argument, working class people lack cultural capital. They are things like the values, experiences, the ways of living that you might have in the middle class. So that I'll talk about cultural factors as 1 paragraph. You've got to criticize it. Your criticism would be, however, many students from the working class do achieve well, and some students from middle classes don't achieve well. Okay, so it doesn't have to just be because of cultural factors. First paragraph done and dusted. Second paragraph, we're going to go into anything that can happen at school. So you're going to mention that it's not just things that happen at home that can affect achievement. It's also things that happen in school or internal factors. Let's pick a nice, easy one for this one. So let's just talk about labeling. You'll need to explain what labeling is, how it can work, how it can be linked to teacher expectations and potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you want a sociologist, again, it's going to be Becker or Hargreaves. You can just recycle that if you've used that in the previous question. You're then going to need a criticism for this as well. So my criticism would be, however, not all students live up to the self-fulfilling prophecy. Some students actually work to go against the labels that they're given. So if a teacher tells you you're going to amount to nothing, you think, well, I'm going to show that person, I'm going to work really hard to prove them wrong. That's your second paragraph done. And then your third paragraph, let's go back to those out of school, those in-home factors. We're now going to talk about material factors. Material factors are anything that relates to money or things you can buy or touch. Obviously, middle-class students have a greater level of finance and ability, so they can afford things, whether that's things like tutors and resources, textbooks, or if it's talking about things like having a better home that isn't as cramped, so you can do more revision. It might be talking about homes that are damp. So working class kids tend to live in poorer accommodation. That might be because it's cramped, so you've got nowhere to do your revision. It might be because it's damp and mouldy, which means it's going to make you ill. You're going to miss lessons. As you miss the lessons that they talk about, the thing that's on the exam, you're not going to do very well in the exam. Again, that's another example you can use. How do you criticize it? You might talk about the fact that just because people have money doesn't mean it's going to guarantee success, although obviously Marxists would argue it does. You might even throw in the functionist argument that actually it's not about what you've got, it's about how hard you work and the meritocratic approach you give to your studies. So ultimately, this question, you've got to have a paragraph on cultural factors, a paragraph on in-school factors, let's say labelling, a paragraph on material factors, let's say housing, and you've got to link it to working class all the time. So keep thinking about the ways in which working class kids might lack cultural capital, according to Bourdieu, the way they might be labelled by certain teachers. Becker actually mentions that teachers label pupils according to the ideal pupil, and class is one of those aspects again, so that's why you can link it to class. And then your material factors is quite easy, because basically working class people have less money than middle class people. So there you go, there's your essay for that. We're now on to the final section. That's the worst part of it all done. We're now on to methods, so research methods. Excuse me, question 6. So the first question you've got here, it says read the passage and answer the question that follows. A recent sociological study looked at teenagers' attitudes to climate change. Bear that in mind, because you're going to be asked about this in a minute. Questionnaires are used in the research, and sampling was used to make the study representative. First question, what is meant by representative? 2-marker, you've got to give a basic definition and then a little extension of it. So what's meant by representative? It's basically about getting a good mix of people in your sample, in the people that's going to take part in the study. That's a basic definition. Then you need to develop it. So give an example of a sampling method: random, stratified rambling, systematic. There is one more, I can't think what it is. Quota sampling, I think. Yeah, quota sampling. Or you could talk about the fact that not every study needs to be representative. You might talk about the ways in which they might try to obtain people from different groups to get a really representative mix of people that matches the population, so including all people of different genders, sexualities, classes, disability, whatever. Okay, it's only a 2-marker. Give the basic definition. It means including a decent mix of people, and then develop it very briefly. Question B, explain 2 advantages of using questionnaires for this research. So the question here is actually asking you about the study in the passage, which is about teenagers' attitudes to climate change. Easy for me to say. So teenagers' attitudes to climate change. Why are questionnaires good for this? Well, there's a couple of reasons, isn't there? I mean, think about your basic reasons for why questionnaires are good. Ultimately, you're going to think it's going to reach a large sample of people because they are cheap and easy to produce. So if you can knock a bunch of these questionnaires out, you can get those to as many people as possible. You've got a large sample size, which should mean that you should get more people responding to your questionnaires. The other thing I suppose you want to talk about with this, what's the item again? Climate change. So you might think again about the fact that because questionnaires are reliable, that means that they can be repeated easily. You might repeat this research year on year and year, and then start establishing patterns and trends about what young people think about climate change, or any other advantages of questionnaires you want to use. And always think about your pet factors, so your practicals, your ethicals, and your theoreticals. Very few ethical issues with questionnaires, for instance. All right, so last question, 12-marker. They don't make it easy to finish off. You've got another mini essay. Well, I say a mini essay. You've got another essay to write. Discuss the weaknesses and strengths of unstructured interviews in research. You should explore 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses. So yeah, you need to talk about 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses of unstructured interviews. Very brief introduction. You might mention unstructured interviews are a type of method that's like a guided conversation. It's very flexible. 2 strengths of unstructured interviews. 1 strength is that they are incredibly valid. What does this mean? It means you get more truth, and they're more trustworthy. Why is that? Because you can go into greater depth with people. You can build a rapport and a relationship with them. Another strength of unstructured interviews would be that they give you incredibly detailed qualitative data. This can help you really identify and explore some of the people's views on whatever topic you're talking about. Then your 2 weaknesses, let's go for lack of reliability. So reliability means the ability to repeat these things easily. You can't repeat unstructured interviews very easily. Why not? Because often it's just down to the researcher's skill and the researcher's flexibility in how they handle that conversation. It's not like just giving someone a questionnaire where they answer exactly the same questions in exactly the same way. Unstructured interviews are not standardized questions. You just go and kind of go with the flow, so to speak. Another weakness of unstructured interviews would be that they, I suppose, let's just go for the classic one, a practical factor, that they are quite expensive and they're quite time consuming. Why is this? Well, you need a good, well qualified, skilled interviewer to do these. They are not cheap. Also, unstructured interviews take a lot longer than structured interviews. For instance, I mean, on average, an unstructured interview takes anywhere between an hour and 2 hours long. A structured interview will be anywhere between 15 minutes and half an hour. So again, you're thinking you're not going to be able to cover as many of these. You won't be able to increase your sample size as much. You might have a small sample size. Is that going to lead to lack of representativeness in your data? Okay, and then finish off with a very quick conclusion. Literally, my conclusion would be, in conclusion, there are strengths, e.g., whatever the strengths are you mentioned, and weaknesses, e.g., whatever the weaknesses you mentioned are, to unstructured interviews in research. Once you've done that, you're done. And that's it, basically. So I'm going to come back and, God, that was hard, wasn't it? And just say goodbye, basically. I hope that's helpful for you, because quite a few of you have been in touch about, can you do a walkthrough for paper one? Paper one, as I record this, it's the 8th of May, which means paper one is 8 days away. I think it's on the 16th of May for you guys this year, 2023. So hopefully that's helpful for you. If it was, whack a like on it, put a comment on it, let someone else know that this has been available. I'm going to sign off now. This was never supposed to be a planned video. Sorry if it's been a little bit slapdash, but hopefully that's been helpful for you. I'll be back next time. I've got another few episodes coming out, which are planned videos on the topic of crime and deviance. So keep a little look out for those in the future. Until next time, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.